Sometimes it feels like genre and literary fiction are at war. Genre fiction is accused of being shallow and mindless, while literary fiction is blasted for being pretentious and boring. This debate has died and risen again more times than zombies in pop culture. Shoving books into such an arbitrary binary may seem unnecessary, but it does matter in terms of awards and public perception. If you've ever taken a college-level course in creative writing, your professors might have said genre stories wouldn't be accepted, as was the case in my undergraduate years. Among literary circles, the genre label comes with a stigma, which Neil Gaiman describes in an interview with Kazuo Ishiguro. By the time fantasy had its own area in the bookshop, it was deemed inferior to mimetic, realistic fiction. I was fascinated by the way that Terry Pratchett would, on the one hand, have people like A.S. Byatt going, "These are real books, they're saying important things, and they are beautifully crafted," and on the other he would still not get any real recognition. I remember Terry saying to me at some point, "You know, you can do all you want, but you put in one fucking dragon and they call you a fantasy writer." As much as I hate to say it, I'd rather be publicly caught reading certain books over others. But reading genre novels shouldn't be treated as a shameful, guilty pleasure. In the words of Lev Grossman, author of The Magicians, "Novels aren't status symbols, or they shouldn't be. Maybe it's the last vestiges of our Puritan heritage. If it's not hard work, it's sinful. Maybe it's just that we're self-loathing capitalist, and anything associated with commerce, as genre fiction is automatically tainted and disqualified from having any aesthetic value." By now, my positive bias towards genre fiction is probably obvious. This video might as well be entitled In Defense of Genre Fiction. But I do think that literary fiction gets a bad rep too, from genre writers who bristle with defensiveness whenever the subject comes up, and scoff at any book that is hard to understand. It's natural to feel bitter about being left out of larger conversations about contemporary literature. Oftentimes, though, the harshest critics of literary fiction are those who approach it with the same expectations as genre fiction. Plotless books that feature lengthy descriptions are tossed aside for being pointless and slow. With these types of works, though, the objective isn't to keep the reader turning pages, or for the writing to stay invisible. Instead, these books ask you to slow down to appreciate an image or a poetic insight. It's an entirely different reading experience. Beyond public perception, the literary versus genre debate also holds importance in marketing. Readers often look for certain characteristics in books, whether that be interesting world building or thought-provoking writing, or both. Umbrella labels can help you or your publisher reach the best audience for your story. It's like music genres. There's a big difference between opera and rap. You might be disappointed if you get one when you want the other, because their sounds contrast drastically. It doesn't mean one is better than the other, they just serve different taste. Of course, genre and literary elements can coexist within a single work, but we'll discuss that toward the end. First, let's broadly define the two terms. Some genre fiction includes fantastical elements, fantasy, sci-fi, horror. Other subgenres might follow paint-by-number structures, like mysteries and romances. For example, in a romance, the plot points are often familiar. A love interest meet, their attraction grows over time, they encounter a major obstacle and overcome it, usually ending in a happily ever after, or tragic tears. That structural familiarity is part of the appeal. We like variations on things we already love, whether it's book genres, music, or desserts. Genre fiction is also referred to as popular or commercial fiction, suggesting that it's more focused on widespread appeal. However, bestsellers are those that break the mold with original world-building, plot twist, or memorable characters. Readers want to be surprised. Literary fiction, also known as serious fiction, more often takes place in realistic settings. Historical fiction and family sagas sometimes fit into this category. If there are fantastical elements, they're more of the magical realism variety, where unusual happenings are left unexplained, rather than presented as a defined magic system. Stories might be more experimental in form or style. Contemporary fiction is somewhat of its own category, stories set during modern times and written for an adult audience, but with less focus on language. Praise for literary novels focuses on the quality of the prose and what the work illuminates about the human condition or society. They're interested in exploring complicated thematic questions, like, does everyone deserve forgiveness? Or, how does sexuality intersect with class? Discussions of psychology and philosophy are at the heart of these stories. Genre fiction tackles these big questions too, of course, but literary fiction relies more heavily on symbolism, metaphor, and nuance in its discussion of these topics. Many people claim that genre fiction is plot-driven and literary fiction is character-driven. These are sweeping generalizations. A number of genre novels would be considered character-driven. Literary novels can have cinematic plots. But there is some truth in this distinction. In fact, there seem to be three key differences between what classifies a novel as genre or literary fiction: purpose, plot scale, and writing style. Within the broad definitions, we can already see a clear difference in purpose between the two classifications. Genre fiction is treated as entertainment, and literary fiction as art. Obviously, those aren't separate attributes. Entertainment and art go hand in hand, and neither label says anything about the quality of the work. Perhaps it would be better to say that genre is more commercially focused, and literary is less so. That is, the former is more often treated as a business, and the latter as a craft. Critics of genre fiction might say its sole purpose is to sell books. It's not about quality, it's about money, which is why so many books, YA especially, follow commercial trends. Vampires are hot, dystopias are selling well, let's flood the market with those. If you read enough of books in a certain genre, formulas emerge. In YA dystopian trilogies, there might be large-scale conspiracies, love triangles, and a rebellion against the government. Readers expect those elements, but they can quickly become predictable. Literary fiction claims to be less about money and more about quality. Many authors who have won the prestigious Man Booker Prize or Pulitzer have master's degrees in creative writing. However, those programs have been accused of churning out homogeneous writers, resulting in a segment of literary fiction whose aesthetic rules can feel binding rather than freeing. As a genre, it follows its own tropes: adultery, dysfunctional families, murder in a small town. Then, truly original avant-garde styles feel inaccessible to the general public, much in the way of modern art. This disparity in purpose relates to the intended audience. Why do readers read the type of fiction they do? It could be said that people read genre fiction for escapism, to explore new worlds, vicariously fall in love, and see evildoers brought to justice. Readers of genre fiction usually expect the problems introduced at the beginning of the story to be resolved by the end. When we crave a beach read, we're looking for something easy that doesn't require much thought. However, the darker genre novels out there suggest readers aren't just looking for winsome heroes and happy endings. Morally complex characters and themes are common across genres. It's inaccurate to say that books in certain categories have no value beyond entertainment. Escapism can be a negative label, but Lev Grossman suggests that it allows us to better reflect on ourselves and the world around us. When you read genre fiction, you leave behind the problems of reality, but only to re-encounter those problems in transfigured form, in an unfamiliar guise, one that helps you understand them more completely and feel them more deeply. Genre fiction isn't just generic pap. You don't read it to escape your problems. You read it to find a new way to come to terms with them. With literary fiction, real-life problems present themselves more directly. Writer Stephen Petit says, "There is a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment from finishing a serious book, and the most important aspect in determining if the novel was indeed a remarkable escape, not from reality but into reality, is if a reader reflects on the words after the last page is turned." Literary stories may lack a definitive resolution of the conflict, thus echoing the discomfort that comes with uncertainty in real life. Neil Gaiman suggested the opposite of reading for pleasure is reading for improvement, and Kazuo Ishiguro agreed, saying that he does turn to books for spiritual and intellectual nourishment, to learn something about the world, about people. Some readers gravitate towards challenging books that take high effort to consume and analyze, such as James Joyce's Ulysses and David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. These novels are like puzzles, and it can be rewarding to uncover nuggets of wisdom from the big picture they provide. Literary fiction aims to make us question social norms and everyday feelings, to explore our own minds. Going back to the character-driven versus plot-driven idea, it seems silly to claim that any novel has absolutely no character development or plot. What these terms really mean is that genre fiction focuses more on large-scale drama and external conflict, while literary fiction is about small-scale drama and internal conflict. A large-scale drama in genre fiction might entail a big bad, a villain the hero must defeat. Since the threat comes from outside the hero, that's external conflict. The genre hero will usually face an internal conflict as well, such as a lack of confidence in their own strength, but that's secondary to the plot action. These stories whisk the audience into a sequence of exciting events. In literary fiction, the small-scale drama usually involves relationships, whether with family members or romantic partners. There might not be an obvious villain or even an obvious plot. Instead, the conflict arises from the emotions within the main characters, and how those clash with the people around them. In novels, the story might span across a long stretch of time, showcasing an entire life. Imagine someone diving into your head, into the deepest parts hidden even to you, and bringing them to light. That's the type of in-depth character study literary authors want to achieve. So, these two types require different ingredients to fulfill the reader's expectations. Generally, genre fiction is faster paced, while literary fiction is slower. Genre prefers a page-turning plot structure, and literary concentrates on emotional nuance and authenticity. To that end, when editing a fantasy novel, I'm more likely to emphasize the importance of the plot structure, an intriguing opening, an exciting climax, strong chapter endings, all the delicious morsels that push the reader to stay up all night reading. Literary novels have more freedom in how the plot is arranged. It's less about big, showy events, and more about the quieter but still significant moments in everyday life. Instead of explosions, the climax might involve one character finally revealing the truth to another, or even having the chance to do so and failing. The spotlight is on exploring something about the characters' inner lives and evoking true emotions. Beyond purpose and plot scale, to me the most distinctive marker between the two categories is writing style. Genre fiction often uses more accessible prose that reaches a wider audience and doesn't distract from the story being told. Literary fiction values carefully crafted sentences that can take more work to understand, but they attempt to capture precise images and feelings. They are often lyrical and layered. As writer Kate Dillon put it, "Simple commercial prose isn't bad, it's just designed to draw no attention to itself whatsoever. Literary prose is an exercise in language. You can't help but notice it." This description even applies to literary authors with minimalist styles, like Raymond Carver and Ernest Hemingway. They are conscious of how the precision of language impacts their work. There is a misconception, though, that a more accessible writing style is less worthy of praise. As the saying goes, easy reading is hard writing. In addition, plenty of genre writers, past, present, and future, craft sentences with flair. Let's observe the stylistic differences between a genre and literary novel in action. Brandon Sanderson's high fantasy epic Mistborn involves a heist and a magic system based on the consumption of metals. George Saunders' Lincoln and the Bardo is an experimental novel about Abraham Lincoln's grief over the loss of his son, and features 166 narrators. Listen to this excerpt from the first chapter of the Mistborn audiobook.
Halcyon had heard stories. He had heard whispers of times when once, long ago, the sun had not been red. Times when the sky hadn't been clogged by smoke and ash, when plants hadn't struggled to grow, and when Ska hadn't been slaves. Times before the Lord Ruler. Those days, however, were nearly forgotten. Even the legends were growing vague.
The opening to Lincoln and the Bardo.
On our wedding day, I was 46, she was 18. Now I know what you are thinking. Older man, not thin, somewhat bald, lame in one leg, teeth of wood, exercises the marital prerogative, thereby mortifying the poor young. But that is false. That is exactly what I refused to do, you see. On our wedding night, I clumped up the stairs, face red with drink and dance, found her arrayed in some thinnish thing an aunt had forced her into, silk collar fluttering slightly with her quaking, and could not do it.
From these excerpts, we get the sense that Brandon Sanderson is more interested in the world and George Saunders in the character details, although the third and first-person narrators contribute to that. But I find it interesting that the two authors receive similar types of praise. Mistborn is said to turn the genre on its head, while Lincoln and the Bardo is described as a thrilling new form. In terms of theme, they're described as tales of love, loss, and hope. It's easy to see the similarities in what makes both good genre and good literary fiction. They surprise us in some way, and they explore universal experiences. Most writers would agree that genre and literary fiction are not mutually exclusive categories, but are better viewed as a spectrum. Countless authors toe the line between classifications, among them being David Mitchell, Margaret Atwood, Ray Bradbury, Philip K. Dick, Susanna Clarke, and Neil Stephenson. Neil Gaiman's style has a more literary feel than most fantasy too. Aforementioned literary author George Saunders showcases sci-fi elements like love experiments in his short stories. Mary Shelley's classic Frankenstein is considered one of the first sci-fi novels, and dystopias like Brave New World maintain critical acclaim. Jane Austen's novels adhere to many romance tropes, with themes of class woven throughout. Some say that literary and genre fiction are blending together more and more, but my opinion echoes Lev Grossman's. They have their own generic identities, their own distinct sets of conventions, and to smoosh them together would be to sacrifice some of our precious literary biodiversity. But I've become very suspicious of their arrangement in a hierarchy, one above the other. Still, we writers can borrow elements from both styles. Literary fiction could embrace plot and fantastical elements more openly without it lessening the intellectual value. Genre fiction could incorporate more character complexity and creative prose without it decreasing the entertainment value. As readers, we don't need to pick a side, and as writers, we shouldn't feel boxed into a category. There's no point in shitting on other people's taste. Write what you want to write, and strive to tell the best story you can. The books, regardless of genre, that withstand the test of time are usually those that push boundaries. And remember that some of the most influential stories out there are those one might call genre fiction. Because fiction is never real, but feelings always are. What are your thoughts on the literary versus genre debate? Share them with me in the comments. Whatever you do, keep writing.